Coming up on episode 138 of Creative Writing, I'm talking about common advice that you should probably ignore.
I can't go back to sleep, it's almost light. These restless thoughts have kept me up again tonight.
Hello and welcome to Creative Writing. I'm your host, Kirsten Oliphant, and this is the podcast for you, a writer, blogger, or creative who wants to build an online platform without being smarmy. And in today's episode 138, we are talking all about common advice that you should ignore. And really, it's not about ignoring, but maybe where the advice kind of gets misconstrued. You know how this is, right? People just toss out these pithy sayings and you hear them all the time and people misapply them. So I'm going to talk about these common things. I bet you've heard all of them or most of them, and maybe how you should apply them or when you should ignore them. So that's what we're going to talk about today. If you want to find the links in the show notes, you're going to go to creativewriting.com/138 for episode 138. And the only other thing you might want to do is sign up for my weekly email where I share the podcast episode when it's out, along with other helpful links and news and tools that are going to help you build the platform with a great audience that you are trying to build. And you can go to creativewriting.com/quick fix to get that. So let's talk about some of this bad advice. And here, let me say this. This is not all bad advice. Sometimes it's the execution. Sometimes it's the fact that people don't understand what the advice actually means or where it stems from. So it's all, it may not be bad advice. Maybe it's bad application or sort of like bad context for them. So we're going to kind of break that down just a little bit. Okay, so the first one of these that I want to talk about is this advice: the money's in the list. And we're talking here about email list. And this is one of those things I hear a lot, especially in sort of entrepreneurial circles. But if you're a blogger or author trying to make money, you have likely heard this because we've got blogpreneurs and authorpreneurs, and basically just we're all people trying to make money with the work that we love, right? So you may have heard this: the money is in the list. And yes, it's actually research and studies continue to show that email has the best conversion for sales. And in case you are really new to email, I do not mean sending everybody on your contact list in Gmail an email and telling them about your book. That's not what I mean. I mean actually having a set up email service provider through MailerLite or ConvertKit or MailChimp or one of those that you can actually have people sign up for who are interested in your book. They're not just friends and family, although friends and family may also be interested. That's the kind of email list we're talking about. And that's what research shows actually works well. Here's the thing. Yes, it's true. The money's in the list. However, I talk to lots and lots of people about email who do not see that money coming in. And so this is just not a given. Yes, email has the best conversion rate, but it takes a lot of work to get there because the thing is this: you've got to actually build a list of interested people. Like I mentioned, your friends and family. They may be people who want to buy from you, but I can tell you, I know lots of friends and family who say they want to be supportive of me, but also will say, oh yeah, I need to go get your book. They're not the people typically who are going out and buying everything I do all the time, except for you, mom and dad. Thanks, mom and dad. They always are. They've got, the paperback copies of my books in their house and everything else, even if they, may or may not read them, they're supporting through that way. But if you are not actually getting the right kinds of readers and subscribers on your email list, they're not going to buy your thing. Also, if you're not creating the kind of product that your people on your list want, they're not going to buy your thing. And if you're not good at selling to those people, they're not going to buy your thing. So the money is in the list, but these are things you've got to get down first. You've got to get the right kind of subscribers. You've got to be giving them the right kind of product. And this is like a chicken and egg thing. So you don't want to get this whole bunch of subscribers and then find out they want something different than what you planned to send. So this starts even as far back as your freebie. So if you're planning to sell a course on podcasting, don't make your freebie about blogging. Don't make your freebie about copywriting. Don't make it about something else. make it about podcasting. So if you're planning to sell something to your list, you need to be getting those right kind of subscribers from the beginning. Again, so it's kind of chicken and egg. These things go hand in hand. But once you have your audience, maybe you'll find that they don't want a course on how to podcast. They want a course on promoting a podcast or something else, just to kind of stick with that example. So it is good once you have an engaged list of people to kind of get more specific with them and ask where those pain points are. You can run surveys and things like that. But again, you want to start it out from the moment they subscribe, kind of having them go through the journey you want them to go through and making sure you're getting the right people on there. And then you can continue to hone your skills of selling. And this is true even if you are not a salesperson. If you're someone who writes, if you're a blogger or writer, which you're listening to this podcast, you probably are, then don't think of copywriting as something you have to necessarily take a course for, or you have to be a business-minded person to do. If you're a writer, copywriting is simply the art of taking that writing and motivating people to a certain action with your words. And I think sometimes we hear copywriting and we think like, oh no, I couldn't do that. That's for people who are good at selling. That's for people who are A, B, C, D, E. And we get this mental block about it, but that's not what it is. It's using your words in a persuasive way to get people to take a specific action. And it may not even be sales every time. Every time you send an email, if you have links for people to click, maybe it's how you present those links. And so you'll get better at that, at finding your voice and finding what that looks like for you in terms of sales. But the money will not be in your list if you have the wrong kind of subscribers, the wrong kind of product, and if you're not able to confidently sell, because that really is the problem I see a lot of people facing because of that mental block, or because people are uncomfortable with selling whatever it is. And this is true for a lot of creatives. If you're uncomfortable selling, sometimes there's a lot of apology around it, and that does not motivate people to buy. Honesty is good, but if there's like a lot of backtracking about things and apologizing about asking people to buy things or clicking links, then people typically are not going to do it. They kind of sense that and go away. So that was the first one. The money's in the list. Yeah, it's true, but only with caveats if you're building the right kind of list. The second one is one of my favorites to actually say, but it can be really misunderstood. And that is, do what works for you. Okay, so while I really believe that this is true, and I am a wholehearted person who purports this, people sometimes think that this really means do what you want. And no, that's not what it means. It's do what works for you. Emphasis on the works. So if you are ignoring the best practices, for example, like book covers, let's take book covers, whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction. If you are ignoring the best practices, which say to get a professional cover or professional looking cover that fits into your genre, if you're ignoring that advice, that's not a case of doing what works for you. You might have surprise success. You might have success in spite of doing a cover that is not professional looking or doesn't work for your genre, but that's going to be kind of outlier success. That's typically not going to be repeatable. Okay. So maybe it happens one time, because there are those stories about the person who designs their cover and it's not good and their book is full of typos. I just heard somebody talking about that this week, and they got a traditional book deal and sold a bunch of copies. Well, okay, that's an outlier. That's one book. That does not mean that person had success every time they put up a bad cover. Those are sort of success in spite of not doing the best practices. And so you want to see something that works, but it might need to be working repeatedly. So, maybe you grow an audience of people who like bad book covers, but it's going to be really hard to find new readers, because that's just a reality, is that people are looking for that kind of book cover in the genre. I just was reading kind of a thread in a Facebook group where someone posted a book cover, and there was a whole lot of debate because the book cover did not match the genre. And some people in the thread were like, we need to open wide the genre and stop pigeonholing ourselves into just having this kind of cover. And other people are like, well, okay, but reader expectations are they're going to look at this and not think it's in this particular genre. So you do want to do what works for you, but it's important, if you're doing that, to know the best practices and to try to fit what you want to do within those best practices. And if you can find something that's an outlying thing that happens to work repeatedly over time, consistently, okay, then ignore the best practices. Maybe you are one of those people who just has that kind of outlier success that defies all the best practices. But generally speaking, those are sort of like the one-hit wonder kind of things where it's not going to be repeatable if you happen to find success going against the grain in that way. And, sometimes going against the grain can be something that's surprising and good, but sometimes people, I hear most of the time people trying to use this do what works for you to justify not wanting to do what everyone else is saying to do. Like they'll get feedback and be like, well, I hear you, but I just don't want to do that. And then it's kind of like, are you really hearing us then? Because you're just doing what you want, or why did you ask in the first place? So do what works for you is great, but the emphasis is on work. Is it actually working for you, or are you just doing what you want? And I've found, I've done this before too, where I just did what I wanted, and when I changed to do more what fit in line with the best practices, even if I was still doing it in my own way or with my own twist, I found more success when I did it that way. So you want to, it's kind of like that whole know the rules so that you can break them thing. The best practices are really important to know in whatever, area you're building or creating. And then you can find your own unique place in that, but you do want to find something that's actually working. Don't just do what you want to do. That's not, do what works for you is not do what you want to do. Another one of these is show, don't tell. And Tim Storm, who's a member of our community and has a really great writing school with paid courses and also just a really great blog. I'll link to it in the show notes. Again, you can go to creativewriting.com/138 for episode 138. And I'll link to Tim's blog post and his blog. But he talks at length about how show, don't tell can be really bad advice. And he kind of gives some examples of how authors sometimes get caught up in the showing and have these really long descriptive paragraphs about things that the readers don't really care about. And they really slow the story down. They don't serve the story well. And that's an important thing to note. And I think sometimes people don't always understand what show, don't tell means. And also, there are places where you just have to tell. There are places where it just doesn't make sense for you to show things. And I think as someone coming from an MFA background, I think I was way too far in the showing, don't tell. And that did not mean I had really long descriptive phrases, but it meant I was kind of afraid to really have my characters say how they felt. Like the internal monologue was very limited and stifled because I didn't want to be too telling. And I've learned kind of to balance that a little bit more because the readers do need to know. But as an example of where I find this works really well, the whole idea of showing, don't tell, works in a good way. So there's a book I was reading. It was actually, golly, I feel a little embarrassed of reading this, but there's a whole series you may or may not have heard of called the Ghost Bird series by C.L. Stone. And I'm not going to necessarily recommend it. I enjoyed them. Anyway, reservations, you can ask me about it in the Facebook group or email if you want to talk more about it. But I really liked one specific example from a book I just read. One of her characters, who is someone who's a sort of very mathematically oriented, a little bit more uptight about certain things. When he was stressed out in one particular scene, instead of the author telling us he was stressed, the author showed this character trying to count the wood grains in the table during a particularly heated and stressful conversation. You as the reader could tell that the character was stressed. You could see it through the action that he was taking. And it wasn't a long descriptive paragraph of how many wood grains there were or what kind of table it was or anything like that, which is kind of the stuff that Tim Storm and his post is saying not to do. It was just an action. And that action was showing you that he was stressed rather than the writer saying he was stressed. So that's kind of where show, don't tell works really well. And I think that can work very well in blog posts too. And so it's something to look for. If there's ever a place where you can use, I love using actions or little idiosyncrasies or tiny details that are able to show how someone is feeling. But there are places where you just have to tell, and places also where you might be over showing. So show, don't tell is another one of those that I think just needs some caveats with it, or people don't really understand exactly what it means. Okay, the next one is one I've also said, I kind of like, I don't know, I like sharing this advice that I've given and also saying like, hey, don't do this. I actually still stick by this, but do one thing really well is advice I hear a lot. It's advice that I will often give. And actually in episode, oh man, I think it was episode 136, I think I talked about focus, or 135. I had that in front of me and I lost it. But either way, one of my most recent episodes, I talked about having focus and how the focus has really helped me. However, there's a problem with this too. So I'll give an example and you can see the problem. Facebook is constantly changing algorithms, but it's had a couple massive shifts. And one of those took place in 2012 or maybe 2013, where they basically killed off organic page reach. And what that means is it used to be that if you liked a page, you saw their stuff in the feed. So there were people, bloggers that I followed who had giant Facebook pages, and they were making, thousands, tens of thousands of dollars every month through like affiliate links and things like that on Facebook. When Facebook killed that organic page reach, what it meant was that people did not see those posts from pages anymore, because Facebook wanted you to start spending your money and putting it into ads. And now Facebook has updated the algorithms again a couple more times, and also really made things a little bit harder with affiliate links in terms of this handshake tool and stuff. I'm not going to get into this. You can Google that and someone will explain it to you, but it's very techy. If you're doing kind of affiliate promotions on Facebook, and affiliate promotions are basically where you share a link, and if people buy by clicking, you're getting a kickback from that. So in any case, when Facebook did that, there were some, and this is both talking 2013 and in the past year, certain businesses closed completely. And there were a couple big ones. I think like Little Things was maybe one of them that closed this past year in 2018 because Facebook changed the algorithm and basically completely choked off any engagement that they saw, or any, their links were just gone. Nobody saw them. They could post and they may have 200,000 likes and 20 people would see the post. And I still see this happening. It's really hard to get Facebook engagement. So here's the thing. If you have all your eggs in that basket, the Facebook basket, and then Facebook changes your algorithm, you're in trouble. Okay. Right. Because you had everything there. So it is really good to do one thing really well, but it's as important to consider, especially after you really have like honed this one thing really well, considering how you can diversify your income, diversify your traffic to your site, just diversify all those things. So if you're really good at that one social media platform, maybe don't try to get good at 3 at once. Maybe get really good at Facebook. And then as you've got that kind of a rhythm and you have a system for how you post to Facebook and when and how that works for you, maybe then you can go and start mastering Instagram or YouTube or something else. So it is really good to do one thing well and have that focus. But if you're too focused and don't ever diversify after you've kind of gotten some mastery or gotten a handle on it, then you could really be shooting yourself in the foot. And just to go back to the whole money is in the list thing from the first one, no matter what you're getting really good at, learn email. At least start having your email list, because I know, when Facebook did that, I was actually listening to a really big blogger talk about how her income dropped and everything changed in how she ran her business, but she had not been growing her email list, and that was her biggest regret. And now that she has changed that, that's where all of her money comes in now, or most of her money comes from her email list rather than Facebook. And so your email list doesn't have an algorithm. Yes, email has some changes, and there's things that are always updating about, how to get into people's inboxes, how to stay out of spam. But generally speaking, if you're using a good email service provider, using best practices for email, then email is the best investment that's going to be long-term, because it's kind of been the same since like 1990s, how email works. And it's not changing a lot, unlike, these social media platforms that come and go, hey, MySpace, or are changing constantly like Facebook. So do one thing really well is great, but also it's really important to kind of balance that with the idea of diversifying your platforms and your income streams and all those things. Okay, here's one that specifically goes for writing, but also there's similar advice for blogging. And that is, you have to write every day, or you have to blog every week. So I'm going to mostly focus on the writing one, because I think there is a sense of guilt that comes with that that's really important to address. But there's this whole idea and phrase and sort of rumor, or I don't know what the right word is right now, but the idea that you have to write every day to be a real writer. And just no, you don't. And I remember hearing one of my college professors talking to me about that. And at the time, I was in college, I had a crazy, I think it was my spring of my senior year, a super stressful schedule. I was in a creative writing class, and so I was doing some creative writing, but I wasn't doing much outside of the assignments. I was because I was writing papers. I was writing Shakespeare papers. I was in a very intense ceramics class, and I was throwing pots on the pottery wheel and glazing and doing all this crazy stuff. I was trying to graduate. I was trying not to be stressed out, trying to figure out my job for the next year. There was no extra writing. There's no extra time for writing. There was no extra writing going on. And I remember when my professor said this, and it was a professor I highly respected, I felt this like crushing just sense of guilt or failure. Like, I guess I'm not really a writer because I can't do that right now in my life. And that's where I think this advice is bad. We can't sit around and define who's a real writer or not. Okay. That's not for me to go and say like, you are a real writer. You are not. You are. That's not how, that's just not, that doesn't work. Okay. We don't need to do that for each other. But this advice that you should write every day, okay, maybe I do think that there is something to the idea of discipline. There's something to the idea of working on your craft. There's something to the idea of pushing through whether you feel like it or not. But there's also the flip side of that is where this idea that if you miss a day, you feel guilty coming back to it. There's this sort of brain thing that happens where we sort of short circuit ourselves and sabotage ourselves when we feel like we have to do something and there are these expectations, and because we didn't meet them, then we're a failure and then we can't come back to it. And I know for me, that was something I really struggled with, having kids and trying to be a writer. And for years I did not write. I wrote blog posts, but then I didn't even consider those writing. I had this mental block even about that, where I didn't fully understand or consider that writing to be writing, because I was thinking of it only in a strict sense as well. And so maybe that's it for you, but there are seasons where you might do a different kind of writing, or where writing every day may look different to you. But I think this advice is great, that we should consider it a craft, that we should push through whether we feel like it or not. But we should also not let ourselves be choked in terms of our actions if we're thinking that we can't meet that expectation of writing every day. We have to take into account the seasons of our life and what we're in. We also have to take into account that we might be writing different things. Writing every day, maybe that doesn't mean writing a novel every day. Maybe it means writing a blog post. Maybe it means writing in your journal. All of those are kinds of writing. It doesn't mean you have to pigeonhole yourself into this tiny little box. And if you're not fitting into it, you're a failure and you're not a writer. Okay, so that's where this advice really stinks. And the same with blogging. Blogging every week or blogging every day as it used to be. Same thing. Don't let that kind of good common advice become a chain around your neck. That's not what it's for. That's not what it's for. You should consider how you can be disciplined about your practice and your craft, but you should not let it dictate how you feel about yourself or whether or not you show up every day. Kill your darlings. So this is another one that you hear a lot, especially on the writing side of things. And I actually went back and looked because I was trying to decide who said it. It's commonly attributed to William Faulkner, but when I looked it up, there's actually, I think the very first example was from Arthur Quiller Couch, who I've never heard of, in 1913 in a lecture on the art of writing. And so I guess in 1913, 1914, he was doing these lectures. 1914, he said, murder your darlings. And so that was the very first instant where people heard of it. And then a whole lot of other people like Oscar Wilde and Anton Chekhov also said this. In any case, whoever said it, it's a great phrase. But to kind of harken back to The Princess Bride, I do not think that phrase means what you think it means. Sometimes people misunderstand this and they think it means you need to kill off what you love, kill off your characters that you love, or, any other kind of stylistic things that you love. And that's not what it means. Typically what it's referring to is that you might have these sort of subconscious tendencies, or you might have these repeat or go-to kind of phrases in your work, or things that you tend to fall back on over and over again that you don't notice. And those are kind of your darlings. As an example, I have been doing a lot of editing. Obviously, I've been writing a fiction book a month for the past 6 months or so. And one of the phrases or words that I use constantly is the word so, S-O. And I use this primarily in dialogue. And what I've realized is that sometimes writing dialogue is a big challenge, by the way, and it's something I really want to do well. And when you are hearing dialogue in your head or hearing people actually say dialogue, a lot of times there are phrases and words that people use in real dialogue that don't work on the page. So dialogue on the page really does look and sound different than dialogue people say in real life. And so is one of those things where sometimes we have these qualifiers like, well, so maybe, these words that kind of like soften the words you're actually saying. And we may actually say them a lot. So I guess I just said so again. Now I'm thinking, now I hear it all the time. But so is one of those things that I would constantly be putting at the beginning of dialogue in my books. And so, oh, there it is again. I found this after editing, how many times I used this and started cutting it out at almost every point, because most of the time it did not need to be there. Every so often, there it is again, I would find a place that it needed to be there. But often it did not. And that's an example of killing your darlings, that this was this phrase, this word that I continued to repeat that I hadn't realized. It was just one of those favorite fallbacks that just came out. And that's more what this means, is that you might have one of these things that you don't even notice. And this is where beta readers come in, proofreaders come in, or doing a really great edit or a reading aloud of your own work really comes in to help you figure this out. So it doesn't mean you have to take away everything you love. No, it doesn't mean you have to kill your main character. Probably you shouldn't. Maybe you should, but that's not what this means. It means finding those things that you fall back on that do not actually make your writing better and getting rid of them. That's what it means. And I'm going to end on this last one. I've been talking a lot about money, I feel like, in these recent episodes, and this I've sort of touched on in episode 137, where I talked about investing money. And this is the idea that you have to spend money to make money. Again, I do agree with this in a lot of ways, but not fully. So the problem here is really in extremes. So I hear people, again, I'm in a lot of Facebook groups and I kind of have my ear to the ground and watch and read these conversations between people. And so I hear this a lot, that some people will say, I have no money. I can't invest in A, B, C, D, E, F, G to make my blog better, to make my books better. So I'm just doing what I can. And then we have people who are, oh man, it broke my heart really, and also made me angry. A little while ago in a Facebook group, there was someone who was just in despair. And she said, she was a writer, an author, and she was saying, I've invested $3,000 in my first 2 books and I have made like $100. And it just killed me, because she did a breakdown of all the money she spent. And I was just seeing all of this waste. She paid some kind of marketing firm. She did all this other stuff. And I went and looked at her books, and the covers weren't great. So again, there was money being spent, but in the wrong places. And she was just in despair over the fact that she had spent all this money and invested it, and it did not come back, did not even close. She didn't even break even. And so I see people doing one of the two things. One, saying they don't have any money, and the other, pouring money stupidly into stuff that does not matter. So if you're not sure if the stuff matters or not, go back to episode 137, where I give you 6 questions you should ask before you invest. And you could ask in Facebook groups if you're not sure if something's a good investment, because we've definitely had people asking like, hey, should I go with this? And some people are like, yes, I've used it, it's great. And other people are like, no, that's a scam. So it's really helpful to ask, which is one of the things I recommend in episode 137. But here's the thing. I'm going to give this example of Jamie Albright, who is an author that I have met and hung out with and is amazing. And she's a romance writer who's local to Houston. And she wrote, I guess it was, I don't know if they came out in 2016 or 2017. I think it was 2017. She wrote 2 books that came out a month or 2 months apart. And those are the only books she has published so far. And she's making a full-time income on those 2 books, which is amazing. That's not normal. A lot of writers are not doing that. They're writing books every month, which is what I'm starting to find success with, and getting, bringing in close to a full-time income now by doing that. But here's one thing that she did. She did not have a big budget going in. And so I heard her speak at a local writing group, and she said that she knew she needed great covers, and her covers are great. I'll link to those in the show notes. They are romance, but not clean romance, just in case. I like to qualify that, because I know I have some of you guys who read my stuff, just to make that clear. And so what she did, again, this is extreme, but this illustrates my point. To pay for her covers, which actually weren't super expensive, but again, she was on a super tight budget, She sold bone marrow. So when I hear people say, like, I can't afford this, and this being the very basic of something, a good cover, if you're selling a book, is a really basic, important thing that you need. She spent, I think, $100 on each cover, and she sold bone marrow to afford it because that's what she had to do. And her books, that investment paid off. Her books have her, now she was able to quit her job and she's writing full time. So again, episode 137 talks about where to put that right investment. She chose the right place to put the investment. She didn't go crazy and spend $1,000 on covers, which sometimes you can do that. She found a great cover artist. She worked with them until they got it just right. And she made sure that she could afford to put that money where it belonged. She didn't have tons of money for other things. She had it really budgeted, really bootstrapped from the beginning. And as money came in, she put that back into AMS ads and other things to keep the money coming in. But I think that's a really important example because sometimes we say we don't have the money for this. Well, what could you do to have the money if it's really important? And a book cover is something that's really important. And, in the same vein, I have some books where I've paid, most of the books that I have, I don't think I've paid more than $50 for a cover. And my covers and books are doing really well. At some point I might update. I actually just paid $50 to redo basically one of my covers just to make it a little bit sharper and sell better. And it worked really well. And so I think there are places that you want to invest, but sometimes you just have to make the money. You have to find the money. Maybe you do something else so that you can invest in that right place. But you don't want to go crazy and invest in something that's not going to give back to you. And I see a lot of people doing this with courses where they're paying $1,000 for a course where maybe they could have spent $300 and had private coaching from someone in their field. And that would have been much more helpful than spending $1,000 on a general course that's for all people. And so, it is really important to think about what investments you have. I do think to some degree it's true you have to spend money to make money, but that doesn't mean you have to spend thousands of dollars. You can really bootstrap something well and also make money, but you have to treat it seriously. So it's kind of all about finding that sweet spot. What can I afford? What can I sell or do so that I can afford it? And what's the level I kind of need to start at? Like the minimum viable cover price, for example, like what's the minimum viable cover price I need to have a great cover for a book? And maybe if it starts to sell and do really well, maybe I can make the cover better and pay a little bit more and have more success. But that's when you have money coming back in. Okay, so I hope this has been helpful. Most of these phrases, they're not necessarily untrue, but sort of taken out of context or people apply them wrong. I would love to know from you guys, and we'll have a discussion in the Facebook group about that. If you're not in the Facebook group, you can go to createifwriting.com/community, or just search for Create If Writing on Facebook and you'll find our group. We'll have a discussion on which of these phrases you think you've seen people misapply or you've fallen prey to, or which ones you think are super true or really make you hard eye roll. I'd love to talk about that in the Facebook group. But for now, if you want to go find some of the links that I mentioned, you can go to createifwriting.com/138. And I hope that this will help you avoid sort of having a misconception about any of these ideas or holding too tightly to any of these sort of pithy things that people just throw out often as advice that you should follow. So that's my hope, is to save you guys from falling into the abyss of bad advice on the internet. And if at any time, maybe you need to take some of my advice with a grain of salt, great. Do what works for you. Again, emphasis on work. Okay, you guys, with that being said, I hope that you go out this week and create more content you love to serve your people well.